What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Wednesday, Wednesday, June 4th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. 10-game MLB slate tonight. We had a 3-game early slate. Hopefully it went better for you guys than it did for me. But 10 games, some good pitching, some very questionable pitching as well. A couple games with weather concerns in Tampa Bay and in St. Louis. So we will need to keep an eye on those. The way things look right now, I would probably play both, but that can certainly change quite a bit in the next couple of hours. So definitely want to keep an eye on those. I don't have a whole lot else to say about them. Doesn't look like either one's necessarily a washout, but neither one looks safe either. I'll hit on that again when we get to those games, but going to go through game by game as usual. The only difference is that because lineups are being released, ownership ends up getting thrown off, etc. I don't have lineups built that I'd be playing. I do have optimal percentages, though, how often I think players are optimal based on our projections at Run the Sims. So I can compare that to ownership, but I think that going through my whole process with lineups when data is kind of up in the air would have just been a waste of time and not really helped any. So I have optimal percentages. I don't have lineups, but we'll go through game by game as usual. Probably get a couple lineups during the show as well. So if I happen to say that I like somebody that's not playing, obviously you can ignore that. But yeah, going to get into it. Also started at the old normal time today at 5. That was just because I had some stuff going on this afternoon. In general, I am still trying to do this earlier in the afternoon, but today was an exception. So as always, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to the channel so you get notifications when I post the shows, because that start time will fluctuate a little bit since I'm the only one doing the show. So it's not like, when you have multiple people doing shows and you can find people to do it at the same time every day. So, do that just so when the shows are going live. But in general, I am going to aim still for the early afternoon. I know people have been happy with that. So getting into it now, using the Run the Sims projections. As a reminder, you can get access to these using the link in the description below. Use that promo code at the bottom of the screen, UDAMLB, and get 10% off as well. Fully detailed, downloadable projections. Upload them into whatever optimizers, sims, whatever models you use. You can use them if you have prop models as well. I use them for my pitching prop model, pitching strikeout model rather. So that's fully available, the projections you see on the screen. Also, if you're somebody that plays lower volume, you don't need access to all of the detailed data, but you do want the projections. We do have the lower tier $10 a month option that just overlays the DraftKings projections onto your DraftKings lineup page. So you're hand building, you can see the projections right in front of you and make your decisions that way. Those are both available with the link in the description below. Now getting into it, starting with the Guardians taking on the Yankees in New York. Obviously a good park for offense. Clark Schmidt taking on Luis Ortiz. Schmidt getting 14% ownership. Ortiz getting 4%. $7,500 price tag on Ortiz. $8,200 price tag on Schmidt. I'm right in line with the field as far as optimal percentage goes on Schmidt. He's showing up as optimal 14% of the time for me. You can see we have a very reasonable 15.5 fantasy point projection for him here. 5.5 strikeouts projected to go 5 to 6 innings. He has been solid overall this season, and it's not a great strikeout matchup against Cleveland. But one thing I have mentioned on Schmidt previously on shows, he's thrown 43 innings so far this season, respectable 23.5% strikeout percentage, but that is down a little bit from last season when he struck out 26.5% of hitters. He's had a very difficult strength of schedule, for lack of a better phrase, when it comes to strikeout matchups so far this season. So I'm not really concerned about the little bit of a drop off there in strikeout numbers. His two most recent starts were more favorable, facing the Angels and facing the Rockies, although the Rockies were still in Coors, but it's still the Rockies. But other than that, he's faced the Mets, the Mariners, the Padres, the Blue Jays, the Guardians, the Royals, a lot of the most difficult teams to strike out. So he is somebody that most likely his true strikeout percentage is more in line with that higher number that we saw last year than with the slightly lower number we've seen this year. And we have seen the number this year increasing, start by start. So not concerned about any of that. Obviously, it's not an ideal strikeout matchup here against Cleveland. It's another difficult spot for him. They're 18th in strikeout percentage, so not as low as they have been in the past. And one thing to keep in mind, too, when you are talking about average strikeout rates on an active roster, in addition to the fact that it's not necessarily the hitters in the lineup, but with a team like Cleveland, where you have Steven Kwan that just doesn't strike out, Jose Ramirez that doesn't strike out. Them being middle of the pack as opposed to at the bottom actually does kind of speak to an elevated strikeout percentage for a lot of other individual hitters in the lineup, which is a little bit of a nuance that does matter when you're actually projecting strikeouts. So again, you can see the 5.5 strikeout projection for Schmidt on the screen. I think he looks fine as a mid-range play at that price. For Luis Ortiz at 7,500, getting 4% ownership, 9% chance of being optimal. Still a low probability play. I think that, maybe technically going a little bit under-owned here, but it is obviously a brutal spot against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium. I wouldn't imagine getting to that much Luis Ortiz here. You have plenty of other pitchers to choose from. Overall this season, he does have a decent 21.7% strikeout percentage, or actually that's going back to last season. This season, he's at 24.8%, which is up 5.5 points from last year. Stuff plus grade is slightly below average at 98. That's slightly higher than last season. Pitching plus grade 95, location plus grade 96. Like nothing looks really good for him other than an average fastball velocity of 96 miles an hour and a good strikeout percentage, but you're not getting him at that really cheap price tag you were getting him at before. I don't know for sure, but I want to say he was like $6,000 either last slate or the start before. So getting him at 7,500 here in Yankee Stadium, certainly not any sort of a discount. I don't think there's much of a case to be made for him other than he is very low owned and maybe he'll pitch well, which obviously applies to most pitchers. For the bats here, not getting to a ton of either side in terms of optimal percentage. Starting on the Cleveland side against Schmidt, obviously this is a good park for hitting home runs, so you do get some upside there. The matchup not ideal against Schmidt, but there is plenty of home run upside given the park. 141 expected ISO allowed to lefties for Schmidt so far this year, 140 to righties. So no real splits there. 25% K percentage against righties, 22% against lefties. There's nothing that really stands out when you look at Schmidt that you would be targeting from a matchup standpoint or a split standpoint. So really it just comes down to, I think, if you're going to play the Guardians, you're just going to look for the best hitters on the Guardians or the best point per dollar values. So as a result, 9% chance of being optimal for Jose Ramirez. Angel Martinez is second at 6.5% because he's only 3,500, batting second with MPE. Bo Naylor at 5%, Stephen Kwan at 5%. So just a secondary stack here, mostly driven by the fact that they are playing in Yankee Stadium, much more so than the fact, than the matchup against Schmidt, because it's not a particularly good one. On the Yankee side against Ortiz, very similar optimal percentages here. Obviously, they're going to be a bit more expensive than the Guardians are. And so as a result, you get similar optimal rates. 12% ownership coming into Judge, 8% chance of being optimal at 6,500. Clearly nothing ever wrong with getting to Aaron Judge. He has one of the highest ceilings on the slate. He's the best hitter in baseball. There's not really an argument to be made there. So if you can get to him, great. But you do obviously have high opportunity cost paying $6,500 for an outfielder, given how many good outfield options there are. 162 expected ISO with a 25% K percentage against righties for Ortiz this year. 24% K percentage against lefties is solid, but that is where he's been touched up more for power. 263 expected ISO, 388 expected WOBA. Trent Grisham at 4,500, Ben Rice at 4,800, Jazz Chisholm is back at 4,900. You have Austin Wells, Cody Bellinger. There is left-handed power in this lineup with the short porch in right field against a pitcher in Ortiz that has struggled with left-handed power this season. I do find that matchup to be very interesting. Again, I wouldn't call any of them true priorities in the context of the slate. I think that they are pretty much correctly priced. The Guardians do have two left-handed relievers in the bullpen as well to match up later on in the game, but certainly plenty of upside for any of these guys against Ortiz, given the power struggles he's had against left-handed hitters. Pretty much 5 to 10% chance of being optimal for just about every relevant hitter on the Yankees here. Phillies taking on the Blue Jays in Toronto. Looked like Philadelphia was going to run away with the slate yesterday before they just stopped doing anything. I think they sent 11 or 12 hitters to the place in the first inning against Francis. Here we have Nick Abel against Jose Barrios. 9K price tag on Abel, 8,100 on Barrios. About a 12.5 fantasy point projection to Abel, about 12% to Barrios. Neither of those particularly high. Matchup not great for either of them. And the price tags aren't either. So you're getting 3 to 5% ownership, 6 to 7% chance of being optimal for both of them. I don't think either one looks like any priority here, given that we have 20 pitchers today. The Blue Jays active roster has the lowest strikeout percentage in baseball. The Phillies rank 24th. Both of them are solid enough offensively, and both probably have room to improve given the actual talent in their lineup. So neither of these pitchers stand out as priorities. Offensively, there's plenty to get to here. With it being a 10-game slate, there's not anybody getting, 15, 20% chances of being optimal or anything like that. But you are getting a lot of like 5 to 10% guys starting on the Philadelphia side with Bryson Stott, getting 11% ownership. He is in about 10.5% of the optimal lineups with our projections. So I think that ownership is pretty much correct. And that's similar for Schwarber at 8%, Harper at 7%, Turner at 7%. None of those guys look really over-owned or under-owned. It just pretty much looks correct. They give you high upside. They all have power, at least to some extent. The one, Bryson Stott has the least power of the quartet, but he also gives you stolen base upside. Lefties this year have a 171 expected ISO against Barrios, 24.5% strikeout percentage. So he has given up some power to lefties, but it's really been righties that have done most of the damage so far in terms of power. 258 expected ISO with only a 19.5% K percentage. So that's another point in favor of Trey Turner, but also in favor of Castellanos, who's only getting 3% ownership at 4,100, in favor of Real Muto, who's getting 5% ownership. So don't sleep on the righties here against Barrios. Obviously, still getting to Stott, Schwarber, Harper is fine. Like, those guys are all good. They give you a very high ceiling, but I do like that Barrios has given up that power to right-handed hitters, because it does sort of enable you to go deeper into the Philadelphia stack and feel good about it when you can get to, a lower owned Castellanos or Real Muto or Alec Boehm, whatever it may be. So Philadelphia, I think, looks pretty good there. Toronto on the other side, obviously limited sample for Mick Abel, but he is certainly an unproven commodity at the major league level. Had a very good first start. I believe it was his debut earlier this season. He went 6 innings, struck out 41% of the hitters he faced, didn't walk anybody. Projects for like a 21 to 22% strikeout percentage, depending where you look, around a 4.5 FIP. He doesn't project to be a great pitcher in the major leagues, at least right now, or anything like that. So I think the Blue Jays are okay, but I do put them behind the Phillies in terms of optimal percentage, in terms of chances of success. Alejandro Kirk, 5%, George Springer, 5%, the two highest optimal percentages for Toronto. That's driven in part by salary. 3,400 on Kirk at catcher is pretty cheap. He's batting 4th, so good spot in the order for him. You're getting a good point per dollar play. If you sort point per dollar in this game, you can see that it's pretty much Toronto. Not necessarily the best hitters on Toronto. The bottom of the order showing up here with Rodin and Clase, but you have some cheap bats here. Then you get to Stott, Real Muto, Kepler, Marsh's value. But there is value on the Toronto side. Maybe use them as mini stacks, full stack a more expensive team, and then mix in Addison Barger, mix in Alejandro Kirk, whatever fits from Toronto. I think that's one way you can approach it. But optimal percentage does also factor in salary, and they're still basically just showing up at like 3 to 5% across the board. Vlad Guerrero getting the most ownership here at 8%. He only showed up as optimal 3% of the time. He is our highest projected Blue Jay, but still just not showing up that much because he is 4,900. He is first base only, so there is going to be opportunity cost there. That's not to say Vlad's not a good play or anything like that. Like, obviously, it's Vlad Guerrero against an unproven pitcher. It is to say that using our data, it looks like he's going a little bit under-owned. There's probably going to be some other first base options to get to. Cardinals game postponed. Thank you, Josh, for that. That makes this slate a little bit less of a pain in the ass, given that game looked like it was going to be an issue. So now weather-wise, we really, I think, only have to worry about the Texas and Tampa Bay game. And that looks right now, at least, like it's just going to be what you get all summer long, probably. Anybody that's ever been to Florida is aware of how rain works in that state. It's going to rain at some point. Nobody knows when, and then it'll probably clear out pretty quickly. Looks like the only game where we have weather concerns. So bats, I think, in the Rogers Center are fine on either side, but I do prefer the Philadelphia side against Barrios. Arizona taking on the Braves. Chris Sale getting the most ownership on the slate. One other thing to keep in mind now that Kansas City and St. Louis game is off the board, optimal percentages naturally are going to go up for pretty much everybody because he just removed 2 teams from when I ran stuff. But Chris Sale, 48% ownership. Merrill Kelly getting 8%. I do think Sale is going over-owned here, but I've said it a million times, a pitcher being over-owned doesn't mean that they're a bad play. You have plenty of other ways, especially on a 10-game slate, to fill out the rest of your lineup with low-owned players. It just simply means that I think Chris Sale's getting more ownership than he deserves in terms of optimal lineups. But you're not trying to build optimal lineups. There are plenty of lineups that you expect to make money over the long run that have Chris Sale, just like there are plenty of lineups that don't. So you don't want to get in the trap that I think a lot of people do, especially when they talk about DFS, of thinking like one player is super important. They don't matter. Your lineup matters. You can pick basically any single player on a DFS slate, and regardless of their ownership, generally, you can make a lineup that you expect to make money, whether you have them or you don't have them. So that's not what I'm saying, but I am saying that 48% ownership for a guy with a 24% chance of being optimal. I do think Sale's getting a bit more ownership than he deserves. He's really good. He is our highest projected pitcher on the slate, as you can see, edging out Nick Pivetta, but he does also have a tough matchup here against Arizona. Now, he does benefit by being left-handed in the sense that Corbin Carroll is a lefty and Josh Naylor is left-handed. The rest of this lineup is right-handed, but it's always nice when you have the platoon advantage against like the best hitter on the team you're facing. But it's not like Corbin Carroll can't hit left-handed pitching. And Corbin Carroll also obviously does have stolen base upside. Chris Sale is not very good at limiting stolen bases. So if Carroll does find his way on base, he is probably running. And, you run the risk there of like, let's say Sale just walks Carroll or Carroll gets a bloop hit. Suddenly that's a double or a triple because he's off to the races. So it's certainly not a safe spot by any stretch for Sale. He has been very good this year, but he's also priced up. He's $9,800 facing a very good offense. Overall this season, he has a 30% strikeout percentage, which is obviously excellent. 107 stuff plus grade is very good and up from last year. Pitching plus grade and location plus are both down from last year. So you have seen some command issues for Sale, but the stuff's still very good. The strikeouts have still been there, even though they're a little bit lower than last season. So long story short, basically, Chris Sale is the highest projected pitcher on the slate. He is obviously a good play. I think he's getting a little bit more ownership than warranted. I think he's a better play than like I thought Spencer Strider was yesterday. And I'm not just saying that because Strider ended up being awful, but like here I at least look and I'm like, yeah, okay, I understand why 40 to 50% of the field would play Chris Sale. He's the highest projected pitcher on the slate. I don't really have any disagreement with that projection. He is, one of the highest strikeout guys on the slate, et cetera. Whereas yesterday you had Spencer Strider against one of the best offenses in baseball with lower velo than usual, worse command than usual, a worse slider than usual, coming off of, 2 or 3 starts off of an injury. And the field was just treating him like he was Spencer Strider prior to the injury, which made no sense. Here with Sale, like he's still really good. We know he's really good. And he's certainly capable of dominating any lineup, but it is a scary spot. Arizona is a good offense. They have like between a 3.5 and 4 implied run total. So they have the low implied run total here, but certainly a dangerous spot for Sale. On the other side for Kelly, dangerous spot for him as well. 8,600, 8% ownership, 10% chance of being optimal. So far this season, 22.9% strikeout percentage is up slightly from last season. Looks like that's mostly driven by improvement in command. Location plus grade is up 2.5 points from last year. Pitching plus is up about 2 points as well. Stuff plus still sucks. Still only throws 92 miles an hour. But you have seen a little bit of an uptick in strikeout percentage, but clearly a scary spot against Atlanta. They can do a lot of damage against him. You have Acuna in the lineup. You have, a solid top of the order there with Acuna, Riley, Olsen, Ozuna, Albies 1 through 5. So no real confidence in Kelly, but he is at least a good enough pitcher that on a slate that, pitching wise is very top heavy, where you have Sale, you have Pivetta, and then for anybody that noticed when I showed all the pitcher projections, Cade Povich right now is our 3rd highest projected pitcher. That speaks very loudly to the depth of pitching on this slate. Once you get beyond Sale and Pivetta, it's going to turn into a lot of, if the pitcher's priced in the mid-range and he's a major league quality pitcher, he's viable because the range of outcomes for like anybody not named Sale or Pivetta today is very, very similar. So Kelly getting 8% ownership and a 10% chance of being optimal. It's not so much about Merrill Kelly is sneakily likely to have success against the Braves. It's Merrill Kelly's not really that much less likely to have success than most of the other garbage pitchers on this slate. And that's pretty much what it's telling you. Offensively, on the Arizona side, I do think they're going a little bit underowned, mostly in the sense of, again, optimal rates are going to be misleading because they have the benefit of hindsight and saying, this is exactly how often these guys come through. Whereas when you're building your lineups, you don't have that information. So you are typically throwing out the lowest probability stuff. Like, they are a low probability team. Pretty much everybody here with a 4% chance, give or take, of being optimal. Ketel Marte separates a little bit, 7% chance of being optimal at 5,400. You do get, to kind of make up for the low probability, you do get the benefit of negative correlation against a 40 to 50, maybe higher percent owned pitcher in Sale. When Arizona does come through, even if it's only going to be 2, 3, 4% of the time, the benefit to you is higher than that because you're knocking off half the field roughly. Ketel Marte, since the start of last season, 285 expected ISO with a 428 expected WOBA from the right side against left-handed pitching and 252 plate appearances. Carroll has a 175 expected ISO. Gurriel's at 205. Suarez is at 221. Grichuk carries pinch hit risk, but he's at 208. Naylor can't hit for shit, 129 expected ISO. But, you certainly have plenty of power in this lineup. I don't think they're a priority, but they are a spot that is probably going a little bit under-owned, especially when you factor in the path to winning tournaments just being that much more wide open if they are the team that goes off against a 50% owned pitcher. Atlanta is obviously more likely to succeed. Another team that has a lot of 5 to 10% chances of being optimal, starting with Ronald Acuna at the top. 8% chance of being optimal for him at 6% ownership, 6% for a still cheap $4,500 Austin Riley. I like that price tag on him quite a bit. And he's only projected for about 4% ownership, which looks a little bit low. 209 expected ISO to righties so far this year for Kelly, 190 to lefties. So again, when Merrill Kelly's on, he's relying on locating really well, having very good command. He doesn't have a big margin for error. And that is generally, I think, what your takeaway should be when you look at somebody like this that doesn't have good stuff, throws 92 miles an hour, like a 91 stuff plus grade, mediocre strikeout rate, but he does have good above average command, which is reflected in location plus and pitching plus. What it's telling you is he's more likely than not going to be able to locate the ball well, put it in the places he wants to put it, and get weak contact, get outs that way. But what it's also telling you is he has a very small margin for error, because if he's missing his spots, pitchers with good stuff can miss their spot and nothing bad happens because it's still really, really hard to hit. If Merrill Kelly is missing his spots, he just gets lit up because no major league hitter is struggling to hit the stuff that Merrill Kelly throws if Merrill Kelly's not throwing it exactly where he wants to throw it. So you do get a smaller margin for error, and that is what you see here with the expected power numbers: 190 to lefties, 209 expected ISO to righties. Guys do put good swings on the ball when he's missing his spots. So Ronald Acuna, Austin Riley, I think both look really good. I like Matt Olson, although 5K at first base, just like I was saying with Vlad, there's plenty of those guys to get to. Ozuna has plenty of power here, but Acuna and Riley in particular, I think really stand out. And I really like Riley, given that third base just isn't as deep as the outfield. Obviously, you can only roster 1 instead of 3, but there's not as much high upside talent at third base as there is in the outfield. And Riley's just, I think, a little bit mispriced here for a hitter that has the power Riley has. Since last season against right-handed pitching, 231 expected ISO is actually the second highest on the team behind Ozuna at 287. So far this season, Riley, 231 expected ISO, 358 expected WOBA. So this isn't really a case of his salary is cheap because he's not hitting the ball well. He does have a 50 to 60 point gap between actual ISO and expected ISO against right-handed pitching. So that is probably driving the drop a little bit, that he just isn't getting quite the production that you would expect given the quality of contact. Those are always going to be good guys to jump on in tournaments when you see that gap like that, because that the actual production influences DraftKings price. So, Riley's still hitting the ball like a $5,200 player, but the actual results are $4,500. So he's $4,500 and you can just, view him as an underpriced piece. Texas taking on Tampa Bay in the game that still has weather concerns, as I mentioned. For right now, I would just play it and hope for the best, but definitely one to keep an eye on. Shane Baz, 7,800. Kumar Rocker, 6,700. Baz projected for about 15 to 16 DraftKings points. Rocker projected for about 12.5 in his return to the rotation. We do have Baz projected to go a bit deeper into the game, as you would expect. 23 to 24 batters, nearly 6 innings pitched projected for Baz. Rocker projected to go just shy of 5 innings here. And I think that makes sense, just given Rocker and how his season has gone. Hasn't pitched in the majors since April 23rd, was on the injured list with a shoulder injury, went 4 innings through 53 pitches in his final rehab start. So most likely not working super deep into this game. Does have a solid strikeout matchup, but again, probably not working that deep into this game. He is getting 2% ownership, 7% chance of being optimal. So low probability play. Again, technically under-owned. Shane Baz, the more interesting of the two, though. Only a $7,800 price tag is pretty appealing on him. Now, keep in mind, you do have this minor league park that, it's basically a minor league Yankee stadium. It's good for hitting. You do have Corey Seager back in the lineup for Texas. Evan Carter is back in the lineup for Texas. No idea what to make of him. He might be a star. He might not be a major league player. We've kind of seen him run the gamut there in terms of production so far in his career. Looked like an absolute superstar when he came up a couple years ago. Looks like a minor league player, last season. So we'll see, but it kind of means it adds volatility. There's strikeouts to be had. There's also possibly a very good hitter in the lineup. But Baz also, speaking of guys that have a lot of talent, and it remains to be seen what exactly they are. 21.5% strikeout percentage so far this year is lower than you would hope for, but has really good stuff. Command hasn't been great, but it hasn't been terrible. 98 location plus, 108 pitching plus because the stuff's so good, 108 stuff plus. The stuff's certainly there for Baz, which I think means that at the very least, you can have individual games where he's able to rack up Ks because he's locating well and his stuff is really good. If he's not locating as well, obviously it does become more difficult to get strikeouts if you're working behind in counts, if you're just, missing your spots and it's leaking back over the plate, throwing strikes, but in the wrong part of the zone, that will drive down your strikeout percentage. But at 7,800, he does look solid here as a mid-range play. Certainly one of the more talented mid-range arms. I think that would be very difficult to argue. So I think he looks fine. There's risk. Like I said, Seager back in the lineup really makes this lineup better for Texas. The ballpark is risky. You have like a 4.5 total for the Rangers, but plenty of upside for Baz as well on a slate where not a lot of guys really have it. Another team with, basically 5% chances of being optimal across the board. Wyatt Langford showing up a little bit higher than that. He is our highest projected hitter in this game. And you can see a pretty decent gap there as well. Pretty solid stolen base projection, solid home run projection. Not the highest mark in either of those categories, but combined, they do make him project well. He is also $4,800, 5 to 6% ownership, highest owned bat on the Rangers as well. 8% ownership. Or 8% chance of being optimal, rather. Josh Young, Marcus Semien, Corey Seager projected for like 3 to 4% ownership with a 3 to 4% chance of being optimal. Nothing that truly stands out from Texas. Langford does look like the most useful piece. So far this season, more power allowed to righties than lefties. More of really just a lot more issues with righties than lefties for Shane Baz. Lefties have struck out 29% of the time with a sub 100 expected ISO, 258 expected WOBA. Righties, on the other hand, only striking out 16%, 255 expected ISO, 401 expected WOBA. Like, those numbers against righties are really bad. You have a pretty balanced Texas lineup, but you do have 3 lefties in the top 5 with Smith, Seager, and Carter. Obviously, Seager is still a negative because he's Corey Seager, but right-handed Corey Seager would be the nuts here against Baz from what we've seen. So pretty balanced lineup. It does help that the righties are not as good as the lefties. Like Marcus Semien's having a terrible year. Garcia just got benched for like a week or 3 days or something because he's been so bad. Jake Berger was terrible. He's been better since coming back up from the minors, but at the very least, he's somebody that you can get strikeouts against generally. So I do like the way that sets up for Baz, and then conversely, dislike the way it sets up for Texas, where the guys that generally Langford accepted and Young accepted to some extent, the guys that you would generally want, starting with Corey Seager, like they do have the worst side of the matchup against Shane Baz. On the Tampa side against Rocker, I do think they are a very interesting tournament stack because we really have no idea what we're going to get from Kumar Rocker. We don't have much of a major league sample for him. He, has had his share of bad games through his first 5 appearances so far this year. Most recently, that April 23rd game, gave up 5 runs in an inning and 2/3 against the A's. Prior to that, he'd only given up 3 in 7 innings against the Angels, gave up 3 in 3 1/3 against Seattle, 1 in 5 against Tampa, 6 in 3 against Cincinnati. We've seen him be solid, had a really good start against the Angels. We've seen him be terrible. He's gone negative in 2 of his 5 starts this year. So we don't really know what we're going to get. And on average, I don't think the Rays look that great individually, but as a stack, I think they're interesting just because we don't know at all what we're going to get. We don't know if Kumar Rocker is any good in the major leagues. We don't know what Kumar Rocker looks like in his first start back from injury. And it's just one of those spots where, like, in a perfect world, I think I'm probably like isolating Rays into like mini stacks and stacks or just not having them. I don't think there's a ton of like one-offs that I want here. Obviously, you can play Brandon Lau, you can play Yandy Diaz, you can play Caminero. They're all fine, but there's going to be plenty of guys at their respective positions that I think look better from a matchup standpoint and a chance of success standpoint on average. But then if you say, well, Kumar Rocker is just not at his average level for this start, then obviously they all look good. So why not just have like Caminero, Lau, and Diaz all in the same lineup? So that's kind of, how I'm viewing it. The optimal percentages for them aren't great. Like, I would rather play a $4,500 Austin Riley than a 4K Caminero individually, but piece together Caminero, Lau, and Diaz, maybe throw like Josh Lowe in there, and that upside, that ceiling for them is really, really high. You do also have kind of weird pricing. Like Brandon Lau at 4,800 is pretty expensive. Josh Lowe at 5,100 is expensive. Caminero is cheap at 4K. Diaz is still cheap at 3,600. You also run into the issue from a stacking standpoint of Diaz now being first base only. So you can't play Diaz and Aranda in the same lineup, which sucks because they're both most likely hitting in the top 4 or at least the top 5. So that's a little bit of an issue with Tampa Bay as well. But kind of a weird team, like very, very high ceiling, but individually not getting a ton of ownership and not showing up all that great in terms of optimal percentage either. Tigers are taking on the White Sox. Sawyer Gipson-Long for the Tigers today. He had been listed yesterday, and I didn't actually pay attention because I didn't care, but I'm going to guess he did not pitch yesterday, considering that he is starting today. So talked about it yesterday, but coming back from the 60-day injured list, he threw 53 pitches in his most recent rehab, probably not going super deep into this one, but he is only 6K, and he is facing the White Sox. So the White Sox suck, and Gipson-Long is 6K on a slate that pitching sucks. So 12% projected ownership, 12% chance of being optimal for him. He's just kind of an average-ish pitcher, most likely in an above-average spot. I think that looks fine. On the other side, Jared Schuster is getting the open/start, whatever you want to call it, for the White Sox. He is 5,500. He's not getting any ownership. He's not showing up for me. Offensively, starting on the Tigers side, not a ton of ownership here, which is a little bit surprising. They do have an implied run total north of 5, but the quasi bullpen game isn't the most appealing thing. Gleyber Torres getting 9% ownership, 6% coming into Torkelson, 6% to Carpenter, around 5% to Riley Green and Javi Baez, like 3 to 5% on everybody else. That's mostly where optimal rates look as well. Torres 5% leading the way, so maybe going a little bit over owned, but nothing too crazy there. Same for like Carpenter, Torkelson, Green, all coming in between 3 and 4%. So I think the Tigers are slightly over owned, but not anything that's really problematic. Mostly, I think just another middle of the range stack here against a half bullpen game for the White Sox. Looks like Mike Vassell maybe or probably as the bulk reliever behind Schuster. So far this season, so you get, a righty probably following Schuster. So far this season, a 140 expected ISO allowed to righties for Vassell, 241 to lefties. So, limited sample there, but has been power prone against lefties, which would set up nicely for Green and Carpenter, but their first at bats are going to be against the lefties. So that, kind of pulls them down a little bit. On the White Sox side, they are cheap. They're not getting any ownership. Optimal rates are, sub 5% across the board. Benintendi looks the best here at 3K. I mentioned it on a couple shows recently, but his expected power numbers are actually really high this year, and he is really cheap. So that's good, but it's still Andrew Benintendi. 248 expected ISO and 116 plate appearances, 3K, batting cleanup, 4% chance of being optimal. I don't mind Vargas as a value play either. He has an expected ISO north of 200 as well, but it's the White Sox. It's going to be pretty tough to prioritize them. They have one of the lowest, if not the lowest, implied run totals on the slate. Orioles taking on Seattle in Seattle. Cade Povich facing off against Emerson Hancock, and Povich is going to be popular. I showed it earlier, but at the time that I started this show, at least, Povich was the third highest projected pitcher on the slate at only 5,700. Povich is inconsistent. He has upside. He has a 23.5% strikeout percentage this year. He has a 102.5 location plus grade, which is up 5.5 points from last year. As a result, his pitching plus grade is up like 5 points as well. So he certainly has potential. He's better than a $5,700 pitcher in terms of talent. And then now you're putting him in T-Mobile Park on a slate that doesn't have any real pitching outside of Sale and Pivetta that you're going to be super confident in. So I understand the ownership. He's completely mispriced. I understand the projection. Like, if you told me that, you think he should be behind Clark Schmidt, like, or Shane Baz, I'm not going to push back on that. Like, they're very, very similar here when you consider standard deviation in baseball. Like, these are basically the same thing. Like, everything in this range, you can debate if Povich should rank, fourth or fifth here instead of first out of this group. But regardless, you can make him fourth and he would still clearly be underpriced, clearly be one of the best point per dollar pitching options here. So he's showing up as optimal 20% of the time. He's getting 24% ownership. This is just one of those where it's what the slate's giving you. Like, the first thought for anybody going into a slate, myself included, is if you tell me 25% of the field's going to play Cade Povich, I'm probably going to just find other things to do. But then you look at it and it's just like, yeah, that's, within individual lineups, that's obviously fine. I can make a lineup where maybe I play Gibson Long at half the ownership instead of Povich. Clearly that's fine. But also there's no reason that I would want to just be like Xing out Cade Povich because the field is playing him when the field has a good reason. He is like the best point per dollar option on the slate, I think. Yeah. And it's not close. So again, like, you could walk this projection back a little bit and he's still going to be one of the best point per dollar projections on the slate. So just a good point per dollar play. He should probably be like 7K. On the other side, Hancock getting 6% ownership, 7% chance of being optimal at 6,500. I think Hancock is one of those pitchers that in a given lineup, if you have popular bats and you need to save salary and be contrarian, then just hope for the best, hope he gets some ground balls. But he's not a good strikeout pitcher. He's probably not a good pitcher, period. 16% strikeout percentage this year, 89.5 stuff plus grade is horrible. 90.7 pitching plus grade, 98.5 location plus. So he does get by on decent command, but the stuff is not good. The strikeout rate is not good. The Orioles are slowly getting healthier. They got Colton Cowser back. He homered opposite field yesterday, which was pretty impressive. So you still have a watered down Baltimore lineup. You don't have Westberg. You don't have Mountcastle. You don't have O'Neill. You don't have Mullins. But you did get Cowser back. So at least 1 through 5, or 1 through 6, they're solid. Like Holiday, Rutschman, Henderson, O'Hearn, who's been one of the best hitters in baseball, Urias, Cowser. There's no easy outs there. And then you get Mayo, Kjerstad, where they've been easy outs in the major leagues so far, but they're also highly regarded hitting prospects. And Emerson Hancock is a below average major league pitcher. So you do kind of want to keep that in mind, that these guys have had plenty of success hitting minor league pitching. And that's basically what they're facing tonight in Emerson Hancock. Then you might have like Jorge Mateo in there. You might have Dylan Carlson. If it's Mateo, that's better for Hancock than Carlson. But the point being, like, this is the Orioles still, B or C lineup, but it's still solid. It's not a cakewalk of a lineup. So there's nothing really pointing to Hancock other than the park is good, the salary is cheap, and he's low owned if that's what you need in a given lineup. Offensively here, basically a 4 to 4.5 total for both teams in this game. 5 to 10% ownership to most of the Orioles. Gunnar leading the way at 9%, 4,800 at shortstop, showing up as optimal about 6% of the time, along with Adley Rutschman and Jackson Holiday. Those are the highest optimal percentages for the Orioles. The park is not good for home runs, and that hurts. Like, if the Orioles were facing Emerson Hancock in Baltimore, I would like them a lot. And if the Mariners were facing Cade Povich in Baltimore, I would like them quite a bit too. But in this park, it's just hard because, especially on a 10 or 9 game slate now, you have to keep in mind what it looks like when teams do well. Like, the Orioles can score 8-9 runs here, and most likely it's 3, 5, 7 fantasy points at a time, not 14, 16, 18, which is what is generally going to win you a tournament. So That's the issue with Baltimore. They are talented. They are cheap. Like Adley Rutschman is down to $4,100. He has not been good in terms of actual production this year. His expected numbers are much better. The truth is probably somewhere in the middle. He is somebody that has below average bat speed. Balls haven't been carrying as well this year. Maybe he's just, I don't know the answer, but maybe he's just like flying out to the warning track on balls that would be home runs last year or something. He's also slow, so like he's going to run bad on balls in play generally, but also he's hitting the ball better than his numbers suggest. 207 expected ISO, 130 actual, 362 expected WOBA, 285 actual against right-handed pitching this year. If you assume the truth is somewhere in the middle, that's still not a $4,100 catcher. So he's underpriced. Gunnar sub 5K looks good. Like Gunnar he got off to a slow start this year, had the oblique injury, started the year on the injured list, still has a 179 expected ISO and a 221 actual against right-handed pitching. Still has stolen base upside. Ryan O'Hearn's top 5 in WRC plus in all of baseball this year, 227 expected ISO, 423 expected WOBA at 4,500. He doesn't have like tons of power. He has some power, but for a top 5 hitter in terms of production, doesn't have that level of power that you would kind of expect. And that's why he's only 4,500, but he's still a very good hitter. So those look fine in this spot. The problem is just that even if they do have a good game, score a lot of runs, it's unlikely to be via a bunch of homers. Hancock has allowed a 198 expected ISO to lefties so far this year, 153 to righties. If you go back to last year, he actually allowed more power to righties, 161 expected ISO to lefties since the start of last season, 208 to righties. He's thrown his changeup 34% of the time to lefties. Usually that is somebody that would have reverse splits, but it's been really bad. 412 expected WOBA on 123 changeups thrown so far this season. 311 expected ISO. By comparison, last year, 271 expected WOBA, sub 100 expected ISO. So probably figures the changeup back out at some point and does better against lefties than he has been. No idea if that ends up happening tonight. But I think the O's look fine. If they were in a different park, I would certainly like them a lot more in this spot. Seattle, I think you can make the case for negative correlation pretty easily. You have a decent, but certainly not great starting pitcher in Cade Povich, getting 25% ownership. The Mariners do have a lot of power in their lineup. Povich has allowed a 294 expected ISO to right-handed hitters so far this season, only a 19.8% K percentage against them since the start of last year against left-handed pitching. Cal Raleigh has a 313 expected ISO, top 5 WRC plus overall in baseball for him this year. Julio Rodriguez is at 212 expected ISO. Arozarena is at 216. Garver's at 198. Can't play him and Raleigh together. Moore is at 174 with stolen base upside. So there is plenty of power here. Negatively correlates. Mostly inexpensive with the exception of $5,500 Raleigh, who has completely earned it, and $5,200 Rodriguez. So low probability team, but because of the park mostly. But you do get that added benefit of if they do well, 25% of the field just lost their pitcher, in addition to every hitter on Seattle being projected for 5% ownership or less. Kerry Carpenter, people mentioned out for Detroit. Obviously, that makes their lineup weaker. San Diego facing the Giants in another very pitcher-friendly park. Nick Pivetta, Kyle Harrison facing off in this one. Pivetta is $10,000, our second highest projected pitcher on the slate, getting about 19% ownership. This is where I think it's really interesting. Maybe the ownership numbers change. Maybe they end up just being wrong. I don't think Chris Sale at $200 less should be more than double the ownership of Nick Pivetta. I think they should be really, really close. Now, we saw this on the early slate. Ownership was just wrong. Cal Quantrill was projected across the industry for like 35%. Kyle Freeland was projected for like 20%. They ended up being like 40 and 35. You could certainly have that happen here, where instead of 50 for Sale and 20 for Pivetta, it's 40 for Sale and 30 for Pivetta, or 38, 32 or something like that. But with the way it's being projected right now, we have Sale projected slightly higher than Pivetta at a slightly cheaper price tag. But again, when you factor in range of outcomes, standard deviation, all of that stuff, these are basically the same play. Pavetta's in a better park for pitching. He's facing a worse offense. he's got really good strikeout stuff, even if he's not quite Chris Sale. 28.9% strikeout percentage this year. Stuff plus is down a lot, but his command has been excellent. 112.9 location plus grade this year is the best of anybody pitching today by a wide margin. He's kind of been like the opposite of Chris Sale, where they're getting very similar results as far as strikeouts go, but Chris Sale's stuff has been better this year than it was last year, but his command by his standards has not been good, whereas Pavetta's stuff hasn't been as good, but his command has been excellent. It was already good last year, and it's been even better this year. But you're getting him in San Francisco. You're getting a Giants team that, against right-handed pitching this year, ranks 23rd in WRC+. They rank 9th in strikeout percentage. You compare that to the Diamondbacks active roster against left-handed pitching since last season, where they rank 29th in strikeout percentage, and they rank 9th in WRC+. I don't really understand why Chris Sale is 2+ times as popular as Nick Pivetta. I think they should be very similar. And so what probably ends up happening for me, if those ownership numbers hold, is that I just probably end up flipping them and play a bunch of Pivetta and not as much Sale. Today on the early slate, I ended up using the projected ownership, which again was wrong. I ended up with like 75% Freeland and just did not play Quantrill. If I had known that they were going to be, equally owned, I would have probably just played a little bit more Freeland because he projected better and was cheaper. But if you get that ownership gap, and if that's still the way it's being projected at lock, I'm going to end up getting probably more Pivetta. The concern is, and this is what's so difficult about projecting ownership in DFS these days, everything I just said is going to be reflected when you simulate lineups, as long as you're using similar projections. Like as long as your inputs have Pivetta and Sale projected similarly, and Sale being much more popular, when you throw it into a sim, the sim's going to say, what the fuck? Play Pivetta. Like, why would you play Sale instead? It's the same play. Play the lower owned one. And so everybody using Sims is going to play more Pivetta, and that's going to pull the ownership up, is going to be the problem there. But either way, like 10K Pivetta is one of the best 2 pitchers on this slate in this park. I'm happy to get to him. Kyle Harrison on the other side, obviously a good park for him as well, but 8,300 in a very tough strikeout matchup against San Francisco. He's getting 9% ownership, like a 4% chance of being optimal. If you're playing a bunch of lineups and you want to play the pitcher in San Francisco and hope he does well, fine. But Pivetta, clearly the priority here. Offensively, I would not expect to want too much of this game, just given the park, given that we have plenty of bad pitching in not bad parks on the slate. But it does look like the Padres are going a little bit under-owned here. Tatis, Machado, Bogarts, Arise, Merrill, all 5 to 8% chances of being optimal, all 3 to 5% ownership. So they look like maybe a decent way to be contrarian. Limited sample on Kyle Harrison so far this year. Only 142 pitches thrown to righties. If you go back to last year, though, a 188 expected ISO allowed to righties, 165 to lefties, much higher strikeout percentage against lefties at 27% compared to 22%, but he has still given up some power to them. So, I wouldn't write off Jackson Merrill, but obviously, as usual, Fernando Tatis, Manny Machado, going to be the best plays from the Padres side. On the Giants side, sub 5% chances of being optimal, sub 5% ownership across the board. Matt Chapman, the highest optimal percentage, $4,100 third baseman, 3% ownership, 4% chance of being optimal. Pivetta so far this season, 178 expected ISO to righties, 204 to lefties. So he does give up some power, but again, he's going to be helped by this park in San Francisco, compared to his home games in Petco, which has suddenly become a home run friendly park over the last couple of seasons. So basically, I think Pivetta is the priority from this game. Very interested to see how his ownership actually ends up compared to Chris Sale. I think they should be similar. And then offensively, there's not a lot that stands out. If you want to take shots at just really high upside players in Tatis, Machado, Merrill, by all means. But I think Pivetta, the priority here. Jake said, without giving up all the goods, can you give an overview of how the RTS ownership projection is approximated? We don't have ownership right now. We're working on that. It'll be coming sooner than later. Right now, we have the actual fantasy projections, which are derived from our in-house sim that simulates each game out, gives you the results of each game. So we're able to factor in things like pinch hit risk, all of that stuff. And that's where the detailed projections come from as well. But ownership is coming. Our priorities were to get actual projections out first and then figure out how to deal with ownership with the way the industry currently is. The ownership projections I mentioned on the show are basically an industry aggregate, somewhat adjusted by me, but basically an industry aggregate. But yeah, our ownership projections are coming. They're not out right now, though. Minnesota taking on the A's in Sacramento, another minor league ballpark that is very heavily impacted by wind. Looks like, we've had good hitting weather the last couple of days, and we're getting more of the same tonight. Mid 80s, wind blowing out, just pretty standard Sacramento this time of year weather. There was an article that I've mentioned in, I think, Fangraphs at the beginning of the year that, if I remember correctly, the general typical wind direction for Sacramento is in during the day, out at night, and it's the opposite in Tampa, out during the day, in at night. And both of these parks are going to be very, very heavily impacted by the wind
because they're minor league parks. They're not as tall. They don't block wind as well. So you once again have a good hitting environment in Sacramento. Zebby Matthews getting 13% ownership, starting with the pitching at 7,700. And again, just a function of the slate. The A's certainly have power, certainly have upside in their lineup, but there are some strikeouts there as well when you navigate your way around Jacob Wilson. 7,700 for Zebby Matthews. So far this season, Matthews has only thrown 14 innings as a starter. He struck out 34% of hitters. That's probably not going to hold. Struck out 24% last year, but the stuff has been good. 108.5 stuff plus grade, 105.2 location plus, gives him a 110.5 pitching plus grade. Again, small sample, but everything lines up well for him. Average fastball velo is 96.5 miles an hour. That's up 1.5 miles per hour from last year. So again, it's scary to get to him in this park, but the underlying stuff looks very, very good for him. So far in a limited sample, it looks better than last year. So I do think that from a talent standpoint, pretty interesting play at 7,700, 13% ownership, 16% chance of being optimal. And then on the other side, you get 7K Jeffrey Springs, 6% chance of being optimal, 7% ownership. Good changeup, but tougher matchup here against Minnesota. 5.5 implied run total. You do get some negative correlation if you go to Springs because Minnesota remains free for the most part. So I assume they're going to be very popular again. But you can't really get to him with much, if any, confidence. He is cheap, though. So there is that. 18.5% K percentage against righties so far this year. 169 expected ISO. 17.5% against lefties. 163 expected ISO. Just kind of a guy. Has a good changeup, but it doesn't really lead to increased strikeouts. It's more just a pitch that keeps righties from completely destroying him. He hasn't shown the same strikeout ability that he had at one time in Tampa Bay. Offensively, I expect most people to be targeting this game. Looking at the bats, there is a lot of ownership coming into Minnesota. In terms of optimal percentages, they are the highest that we've talked about across the board, and that's just a function of they're cheap. They're in this park. They're in good hitting weather. They have a decent matchup. I still think they're going over-owned, 22% projected ownership to $5,600 Byron Buxton, 12% chance of being optimal. That's one of the higher optimal rates for a hitter on the slate. So it's the same as yesterday. I'm not trying to say that Minnesota is not a good play. I don't understand why people would have them, anything like that. They're clearly one of, if not the best overall offenses on the slate when you factor in pricing and matchup and park and all of that. It's just that the ownership is a little higher than it probably should be. Buxton at 5,600, 22% owned, $900 less than an 8 or 12, whatever it was, percent owned Aaron Judge or any number of other really good outfielders that are 5 to 10% owned and maybe even cheaper. It's just they're as likely or more likely to succeed than anybody else, but probably not by as big a margin as ownership suggests. And then you run into the issue of if you are full stacking them, that's half your lineup that is playing guys between 10 and 20% owned in large field tournaments. It becomes that much more difficult to differentiate, especially on a slate like this where pitching is up in the air. If I play a lineup that, let's say, has Buxton, Jeffers, Lewis, Correa, Lee, guys that are all projected between 10 and 25% owned, then I go to Chris Sale or I go to Nick Pivetta, Now I'm down to 4 spots to be different. And I'm going to have similar salary to work with to a large percentage of the field. So like combinatorically, it becomes an issue in addition to just the raw ownership. It's that not only is Buxton 22% owned, but within the 22% of those Buxton lineups, like 65% of them have Jeffers. And within lineups that have Jeffers and Buxton, like whatever, 60% have Royce Lewis. I'm just making these numbers up, but you get the point. So that's the problem. But if you can find ways to make it work, by all means, because they look really good in this park at these salaries. $5,600 for Buxton, obviously relatively expensive, but nobody else is more than $4K. Brooks Lee, $2,800, second base shortstop, is a joke of a price. Royce Lewis has struggled this year, but we know the upside he has. He's only $3K. Correa's $3,700. Ty Francis, $3,900. Willie Castro's $3,200. Jeffers, $3,700, probably hitting at the top of the order as a catcher. Like, clearly a team that you would be prioritizing if you're playing cash games. In small field, you get the different situation where like their ownership probably goes up, but obviously you have less teams to beat. So they become like a little bit easier to play probably, but definitely a team, pay attention to how you're handling them. Maybe a lot of times for me, what I end up doing here is mini stacking them a lot more than I full stack them. So, having a lower owned stack and then just having like Buxton, Jeffers, Lewis or something. One other thing that I've mentioned on shows before, and this is more so true on smaller slates or in massive tournaments, like when you get the $5 on DraftKings, but you can be contrarian within your stack types as well. Everybody pretty much understands like 5-man stacks and 4-man stacks these days. You can be different by like and this goes back to the combinatorics thing. If I have like, let's say a 3-3-2 stack, I can actually not worry quite as much about the individual player ownerships. Like I can grab Buxton, Jeffers, Lewis, and then I can grab, the 3 best hitters from Detroit or whoever you want, because such a high percentage of the lineups that have Buxton plus Jeffers plus Lewis also have 1 or 2 other guys from Minnesota. And so you're just kind of playing for that game where Buxton, Jeffers, Lewis are really good, but then the rest of the team just scores, 8, 9, 10 points and can easily be replaced. So that is one other way you can kind of handle the really popular, highly projected teams like Minnesota is, going 3-3-2 or going 4X or something like that, where you're giving up some correlation, but you're finding another way to differentiate your lineups. Moving over to the Angels side or the A's side against Minnesota, 5 to 10% projected ownership to Butler, to Rooker, to Soderstrom, to Langoliers, pretty much in line with optimal percentages here. Like I said, Matthew's stuff has looked really good, but the top of this lineup in particular certainly has a lot of upside, both in terms of stolen bases and in terms of power. Lawrence Butler is still cheap, coming in at 4,300 against right-handed pitching. So far this season, 201 plate appearances with a 222 expected ISO for Butler. Rooker has a 243 expected ISO. Soderstrom's at 270. Langoliers is at 184. There's plenty of power upside here for the A's at much, much lower ownership than the Twins in the same exact hitting conditions and ballpark that everyone is looking to the Twins for. So I obviously think the matchup is better for Minnesota. I think the pricing for the most part is more favorable for Minnesota, but it's not like the A's aren't in a really good hitting environment either, and they're not super expensive. 4,400 on Rooker is one of the cheaper price tags you're going to get on him. Same for 4,300 on Butler. Same for 4,100 with MPE on Soderstrom. Same for 4,200 on Langoliers. And then the less exciting hitters on this team are pretty inexpensive, to help you round out these stacks. So as a more contrarian team, I think the A's are interesting as well. Choke Oldham said, with that being said, does differentiation matter for any reason other than dupes? Doesn't matter how close you are to others as long as you outscore at the end with no dupes. Yeah, it matters a lot, because basically the way you want to think about it is there's so much variance in DFS. There's so much volatility. You don't have any sort of control over like what the best the best version of a Minnesota stack is going to be, or what the best secondary stack is, or whatever. So basically, I think the best way to think about it is like you can control getting teams into the top 1% or top 0.5% or top 0.1% or whatever. Once you're in that range, though, you don't really have any control. It's not like poker where you can get to a final table and you adjust your strategy based on stack size and payouts and all of that. In DFS, you're done once the slate starts. So you get down to basically the final table where you're somewhere in like the top 20, and it's just a lottery basically of how your team, if you have very similar teams to other people, you're just basically flipping coins on who ends up at the top. But if you have a team that is different within that top 20, you just need your guys to do well and you're jumping everybody. It's not, well, I need my guy to do well and then that guy on the same team that's positively correlated with him to not do well, and then this third guy to do well. Like an example was one of the tournaments that I won last month, the 25K one. It was like a 4-game slate. I think I won with like a 3-2 stack. And at the end, coming down the stretch, the last couple innings of the last game, everybody had 5-man Toronto stacks. And I had a 3-2. I had 3 Blue Jays and I had, I think 2 Angels or something. But basically it created a situation where like Dalton Varsho had homered. So all the good lineups had Dalton Varsho, including me. And somebody else had a big game for them. Like basically 3 guys on Toronto. The 3 I had good games. And so all these Toronto stacks had them. And then they had like Bo Bichette and, one other piece from the Blue Jays where like I had Zach Neto who had beat Bo Bichette at shortstop. And I had, other guys that had beaten those Blue Jays pieces. And so basically it made it a lot easier for me to just jump this whole pool of Blue Jay stacks. And so again, like there's trade-offs to everything. Like I had less correlation than those lineups, et cetera, but differentiating, and it doesn't have to be in stack types. It's why ownership matters too. Like if you just think about it in terms of ownership, if you have 50,000, lineups playing against each other and one guy's 20% owned and he hits 4 home runs, you're in the top 20%. If he's 1% owned and he hits 4 home runs, you're in the top 1%. Like it's really just that it's the amount of competition you have once you get to the point where you really have no control over anything as far as, how things play out. So moving on to the last game, Mets taking on the Dodgers in another very friendly home run park. Tony Gonsolin on the mound for the Dodgers, Griffin Canning for the Mets. I said it the other day. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure Griffin Canning has had a good matchup this year because he's made improvements with the Mets. And I'm really not sure that I've played him yet because it's like every spot he's either not on the slate or so he faced the White Sox last start. I don't know if he was on the slate or not, but Dodgers, Yankees, Cubs, Diamondbacks, his last 4 opponents before that, he faced the Nats, faced the Phillies, he faced the Cardinals, faced the A's, the Blue Jays, the Astros. Like it's been a tough stretch for him in terms of opponents. Haven't gotten to play him much this year, and that's probably going to be the case again tonight. He's somebody that, if he is on a slate and is not facing one of the best offenses in baseball, I'd actually be interested in. Strikeout percentage this year is up 4.5 points from last year. Stuff plus grade is up 6 points. It's still below average, but it's better. Location plus grade is about league average. So he's still not great, but he's been better with the Mets. And this is somebody that, did have some upside back when he was on the Angels and then just fell off of a cliff. But anyway, for tonight, 7,900 facing the Dodgers in Dodger Stadium. I'm pretty good on that one. Just one of the toughest matchups, not a team that strikes out a ton either. Gonsolin on the other side, tough matchup for him at 7,600 as well. Getting 3% ownership, 5% chance of being optimal at 7,600. The Mets against right-handed pitching this season, 23rd in strikeout percentage, 9th in WRC+. I don't have much interest in the pitching here. You have a relatively high total in this game. Also, offensively, this game rivals it might actually, for me, be looking better than the Minnesota game overall, but it's definitely close. On the Mets side, 5 to 10% ownership to most of the relevant hitters. I think that is probably a little bit low. Brandon Nimmo showing up as optimal 15% of the time. Juan Soto showing up as optimal 15% of the time. We've seen Juan Soto finally start hitting home runs. That was just a matter of time. He has one of the highest home run projections on the slate. He has the 4th, tied with Buxton for the 4th highest home run projection on the slate, trailing only his teammate, Pete Alonso, his opponent, Shohei Ohtani, and Aaron Judge. So that kind of speaks to how good I think this game looks, even though neither pitcher is terrible, neither one is great, and you have just a really, really good park for offense. Francisco Lindor getting 8% ownership, 13% chance of being optimal. Alonso, 11% to be optimal, 7% ownership. So I think Alonso probably too is a reason why when I went through those other teams, I thought Guerrero was going a little bit overowned. I thought Olsen wasn't necessarily going overowned, but like only had a 4 or 5% chance of being optimal. I think a lot of that is it's just funneling to Pete Alonso at a $5,100 price tag that really, for what Pete Alonso has done this year, is cheaper than it should be. He has been one of the best hitters in baseball against right-handed pitching this year. 416 expected WOBA, 296 expected ISO for Alonso. Limited sample for Gonsolin, but a 257 expected ISO so far this season to right-handed hitters. 255 if you go back to 2023 to get a larger sample. Lefties this year have a 267 expected ISO against him, 221 since 2023. The guy gives up some power. You're in a park that plays up power. And in terms of raw salary, the Mets aren't necessarily inexpensive across the board. But in terms of what players should be priced, they're pretty much all underpriced. I think you could argue that 5,600 is like correct for Lindor, but Soto should not be 5,300. Alonso should not be 5,100. Nimmo is 3,700. McNeil 3,600. Alvarez 2,900. Taylor 28. Beatty 34. Obviously, those last guys, not the best hitters in the world, but they're just really, really cheap. And like you could make a case that Soto and Alonso are $500 to $1,000 underpriced, even though they're north of 5K. So I like the Mets here quite a bit. They're getting some ownership, but I don't think they're getting enough. On the Dodgers side, like them a lot too. We did get the lineup, as people are mentioning. Rushing is in for Will Smith. So Will Smith was projected in when I ran lineups. It does take away one of the best hitting catchers, but it replaces a 5K guy on an expensive team with a much less expensive guy in Rushing, who is 3,500. So it actually makes the Dodgers stack easier to get to, because that's like the biggest problem you run into with the Dodgers is it's like, oh yeah, cool, I want to play the Dodgers. Okay, 6,400 for Ohtani, 5K for Smith, 5,300 for Mookie, 5,400 for Hernandez, 5,800 for Freeman. It becomes tough to get the best hitters, at least in a stack. So yeah, you're giving up some production in Smith, but now you're getting a catcher as part of your stack that is 3,500. You're covering a weak position that doesn't have a lot of good one-offs. And so that might actually make the Dodgers stack end up looking a little bit better. But Shohei Ohtani, 17% chance of being optimal at 26% projected ownership. So technically going a little bit over-owned, but still one of the most likely players to succeed on the slate. Smith had an 11% chance of being optimal. That'll be lower for Rushing probably. Tommy Edman, 10% at 3,900, second base outfield eligible. Mookie down to 5,300 at shortstop, 9% chance of being optimal. 8% for Muncy, 5 to 6% for Pajes, Hernandez, Freeman, and Conforto. I like the Dodgers here. I like the Mets here. Everybody's going to be focusing, I think, on this A's-Minnesota game, and not that they're wrong, but I think I actually prefer this Dodgers and Mets game a little bit more offensively. So to recap everything for right now, in terms of optimal percentages, at least before the show, and keep in mind this was including that St. Louis Kansas City game. But starting with the pitching, let me get the full projections back up. We have Sale, Pivetta, and a whole group of guys, but at least at the moment, Povich as the top projected pitchers. Sale, Pivetta, the top two. In terms of optimal rate, Sale, Pivetta, Povich. At catcher, Ryan Jeffers. It was Will Smith and Salvador Perez. They're both gone. So obviously catcher optimal rates will change, but Ryan Jeffers, Alvarez, Real Muto showing up as the top three. Rutschman and Wells basically tied with Real Muto. At first base, Pete Alonso. Then it was Pasquantino, who's not an option anymore. Bryce Harper and Ben Rice. Also Shohei Ohtani, but mostly he's being used in the outfield. Second base, Bryson Stott, Brooks Lee, Ketel Marte. Third base, Royce Lewis, Jose Ramirez, Manny Machado, Max Muncy. I do like Austin Riley a lot in tournaments as well. Shortstop, Francisco Lindor, Mookie Betts, Carlos Correa. And then in the outfield, Shohei Ohtani, Brandon Nimmo, Juan Soto, Byron Buxton. And then a bunch of guys that look similar and are just really good. Judge, Acuna, Schwarber, Tatis. In terms of projection in the outfield, we have Ohtani, Soto, Buxton, Acuna, Judge. Top five. The stacks that are showing up as optimal the most overall: Mets, Dodgers, Twins, Kansas City's gone, Philadelphia, and the Yankees. For five mans, Mets, Dodgers, Phillies, Twins, Diamondbacks. Four mans, Mets, Twins, Dodgers, Phillies. So that wraps this. Oh, home run pick before I get out of here. I won't go with Judge, or I won't go with Ohtani, Judge, Alonso, Soto, Buxton. I like Ben Rice. So like he looks really good in our stuff, and I thought he looked really good from a matchup standpoint as well. I mentioned the power that Luis Ortiz gives up to left-handed hitters. So far, 263 expected ISO to lefties. So I like Ben Rice. That's my home run pick. Thanks for checking out the show. Good luck on your lineups tonight. See you back here tomorrow.